Hello and welcome once again to The Comfort Zone, brought to you by myself, Steve Criscole, and Elect Bible Ministries. Now, this is part 2 in the series Teach the Children. Now, in part 1, we talked about teaching the children. I talked mainly about the problems our society has and the problems that our kids face today. Now, I only scratched the surface with that because, well, to be honest, kids face quite a lot in society today, a huge number of problems, and I don't have time to go into them all here. But it might be that we can talk about some more specific problems in the future, perhaps. Yeah. So let's have a look in today's vidcast. I want to look at the problems that they face from a slightly different perspective. That being from the point of view of a child and getting some sort of basic understanding of what we know about child development. So, you know, there's a big mistake that a lot of people make with regards to children, and that is that they fail to realize that kids don't think like adults. I know that might sound obvious, I realize that, but it is a point that needs to be made. And I think it's an important point too. Most of us would agree that we're fully aware. If you think about a toddler, for example, you'd be aware that a toddler is not capable of anything much more complex than crying or saying the odd word or, that kind of thing. But what about the older child? What about a 13-year-old or a 15 or a 16-year-old? Are they capable of complex thought? So anyway, don't worry, I'm not going to sort of head off into a major lecture of child development, but there are some things that on this subject that we need to know about. So to get a better understanding of just how children actually think, we do need to take a little look at child development. So right now, you're going to have a micro lecture, okay? So please just stick with me, okay? And it's about how they develop the ability to think and process information, and that happens over a period of time. Now it might seem obvious, but it needs to be said that children go through a learning curve, a process of developing complex thinking. So they'll start off at a certain age thinking extremely simply, and then that has to gradually develop through time and experience and so on and so on. And of course that continues on as it becomes more complex, bringing in new aspects. It carries on into adulthood, which is why you think we introduce education to children and help them to start learning to think, and then in elementary school we develop that to a certain point, and then they're then able to go on to more complex things in high school, and so on, right the way university and so on. So the beginning of complex developmental sort of thinking, is this critical thinking, starts roughly in the ages of 6 or 7, and it depends on the child obviously, but it's a sort of a general number. So to be able to do that, they need problems to solve. They need encouragement to be able to think logically and laterally. So in other words, they need intellectual stimulation of greater and greater depth and complexity so that they can develop their thinking, or the fancy word for it is cognitive skill set. Now, if we take these as facts, now I want to ask the question, if we take this as a fact, can anyone please tell me how on earth a child of 6 or 7 years old, or maybe even older, how they have the thinking or cognitive processing developed enough to be able to come to some kind of rational conclusion by themselves that they want to, let's say, identify as the opposite sex? Makes you think, doesn't it? So using the same understanding, is a child capable of making any life-changing decision until they have the mental capacity to do it? You see, our forebears saw fit to create, well, laws, social norms, and these things recognise the limitations of children's ability to think for themselves. And that's why we have age limits for joining the military or drinking alcohol. Just a couple of examples. So even when the kids get to young teens or young to mid-teens area, they are still developing their thinking skills. Now, they think they've got it all sorted, but those of us who are a little bit older realise that they don't actually have it all sorted. But, the kids, some do it faster than others, and there are so many different factors that can affect those developing skills. And as I said, I don't really have the time to go into all of this in any great detail. But so we've got to, generally speaking, there's one thing that has a really great impact on a teenager's critical thinking skills, and that's experience. I said that they hadn't got it all figured out, and this is the reason why. They think they have, but they don't realise that they just don't have the necessary experience. Life experience, if you like. So, yeah, they may have developed good critical thinking skills, but without any real world experience, they're only really able to rationalise the information that they either already know or has been spoon-fed to them. So here's something that I'm sure you've all heard this said before. So we go back from teenagers now. If we go back to younger children, we've all heard these phrases like, kids are remarkably resilient. There's another one. And they always seem to bounce back. Well, I've got some news for you. Those sayings are the observations from people who don't understand the first thing about children. To explain, I want to use a fairly, forgive me, but simple analogy, just to try and help us all to understand this. And it's the analogy of a sponge. Now, I think we all know what a sponge is. A child's mind is a little bit like a sponge. Yeah, aha, I hear another old saying. Well, yes, that's true, it is, but well, let's have a look at it in a bit more detail. So, a sponge, well, yeah. Okay, so the children, they tend to soak up everything around them. They annoyingly sometimes even repeat the things that you say that you would rather that they didn't. But that's all being part of being the fun of being a parent, isn't it? Yeah. So let's go back to the sponge. So we put our sponge in a puddle of water, and it soaks up most of the water. Does the sponge change shape? Not really. To all intents and purposes, it looks the same. Might be a bit moist around the edges, but by and by, that's about it. So, if we pick up the sponge and we actually notice it's a bit heavier, don't we? But that's all. So, assuming we don't squeeze it, it will gradually lose most of the water over time through gravity and evaporation, but not all. It will always retain a certain amount. So, that's where the analogy kind of comes to an end, but it's a bit of a simplistic picture of how a child might deal with life events. They might be traumatic events or just something that's troubling to them, perhaps. Now, the human mind, it's far more complex than we know. Yet, one of the things I've learned, through many years of working in therapy, that children just don't bounce back. Actually, instead, what they do is they store away all those troubling thoughts and the experiences, the things that, simply because they just don't understand them, or the emotions that come with them. Now, they're often a ticking time bomb, waiting to go off. And that will cause mayhem in their lives, as often happens. But, as we already said in the previous video, children's behaviour at school is pretty abysmal to some larger extent. And so we have to ask the question, is what is it that the children are being fed? What is it that's happening to the children that's causing them to behave like this? Does the sponge analogy still fit for children like that? I'll leave you to answer that one. Anyway, it depends on issues, I guess, but whatever issues a child faces during their lifetime, the child, generally speaking, adapts their personality to assimilate their experiences and get on with being a child. And that's kind of where people say children bounce back. It's like, okay, so it seems on the surface that they're coping. But all they're doing is they're just filing stuff away. They just have no ability to comprehend, to process at all. Now, we notice, go back to our analogy that of the sponge where we said we picked it up, but it looked the same, but it had something, it was heavier. Well, think about that. The children go through stuff and they have a lot to carry around with them. So why have I drawn this picture? Well, I want you to see just what it is, that if you think that like a child is capable of processing themes of like an adult nature, I've got to tell you that you are barking up the wrong tree. Why? Well, I think we've already seen, haven't we? If you're going to take on board what I've been saying, that children do not have the mental capacity to be able to handle such complex thinking as dealing with issues, well, many issues. And just in the same instance, we'll talk about them in a minute, in a similar way, they don't have the mental or emotional intelligence to handle these things. And emotional intelligence is not something very often talked about, but it definitely is a thing, I can tell you. How to be able to manage and handle and appropriately express and deal with emotions, which is something that is, well, human beings are an emotional being, aren't we? So what does all this mean? Well, if the kids are inundated with themes and ideas that they just haven't got a chance of being able to analyze or even get the most rudimentary understanding of, then there are going to be consequences. I mean, here's one. Just like our sponge, they'll soak up everything. We've already said that. If whatever it is they're soaking up, if it comes from, if the child regards it as it's like an authority figure, they're going to accept that idea without really questioning it. Usually because they don't have the necessary mental ability to formulate the questions, the critical thinking ability to agree or disagree. They just soak it in. And once that sort of idea, whatever it is, has been accepted, well then the child then assimilates that into their sort of very restricted understanding. It's now a fact. They have been told it by, well, in this case, a teacher. It becomes like a fundamental learning. They lean on it in effect. So now they've got that from their authority figure, say it's in the classroom, there's this, or another aspect to all of this innate need that children have got, that we all have, to conform. It's built into us, and it's something that is part of us as children. So it makes sure that no one questions the validity of things that they're taught. That's another side to that. I mean, you might recognize it by the children who play in the playground. You know, anybody who stands out as being different, they are seen as a target, maybe for bullying. So conformity is something that we tend to do. So anyway, there's a principle at play, isn't there, which unfortunately, it's one of the, I believe to be one of the greatest abuses of the study of psychology that I've ever come across. It's one of the most fundamental areas of study that psychology has been involved in, is the study of child development. Now, I think you might, hopefully you would agree that teaching children, or teaching anybody, but teaching children in particular, is a great responsibility. we trust teachers. We trust them to teach our kids good and right things that will help them to develop their various skills and equip them for, for a better life in society, a better life. But unfortunately, some teachers themselves and those that employ them, they're abusing education systems in order to indoctrinate children with concepts and ideologies that most people find abhorrent. Now, I've said it before, and I will continue to say it. We're now in a war for the minds of our children. Now, I hope that this vidcast has gone some way to exposing and explaining just a little of what's happening. Next time, in the final part of this series, I'm going to discuss some of the things we can do about it. So, thank you very much for joining me. Thanks for sticking with it to the end, and God bless you until next time.